I don't have a whole lot to start with other than, and then I'll just open it up to questions. But a lot of developments happening, a lot of good things are happening in the village. Our road program is going well again this year. I think we added 4 or 5 more areas because we were able to get better pricing than expected, so we used our budget to add to that. So we should see that again next year as well. We've got water main projects going on in Fernway right now. We have a lot of projects for next year that are going to open up: Centennial Park West, Schuchler Park. We're going to do planning for Dugan Park. For those of you who didn't see that, the plan is done. The engineering has to be done on it, but the plan's been approved for. That's not Dugan, but the plan like this has been done for Dugan. That would be in a couple years. All the other park projects that we have going on, the road projects we have going on, but also we have opening up next year. We have Steinhoffel's opening up in Orland Park Place, 90,000 square feet. You have Pete's Fresh Market opening up next year. You have Silver Cross opening up next year. We have, looks like Seasons 52 as a restaurant going into where Chewy's is at, but that's going to be a next year. A bunch of other restaurants looking to come. So those are some of the big things that we have. We have 2 medical groups going into the Robert Morris buildings. I'm hoping they open up next year. They've been working on the buildings for 2.5 years. We keep hearing they're coming, but I guess doctors groups move a little slow with moving their practices. So one's an oncology and one's a cardiovascular. So a lot of that happening next year where they'll actually open up. You've seen the Silver Cross building, I'm sure, on 171st and LaGrange. That's what that is. And they do want to do another building at some point, but they're doing one at a time. So, but that's what's going on in the village. Everything else is going well. The police continue to do a great job, keep us safe. Our crime is still, still down and low, in spite of what we see around us, which isn't the greatest. They did a great job. Our police did a fantastic job of putting in plans for all the events that happened. So whether it was Summerfest, which was not our event, or our Taste of Orland, or all of our concerts that we had, they all went well without any incidents. And that's a testimony to our police doing a great job. With that, I'll open it up to questions that you might have.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm just curious if the mayor of Chicago has contacted you, or I'm wondering if they're contacting other mayors for.
I have not been contacted. I've been contacted by a couple members of the press asking me my thoughts and asking me if I was contacted. I gave them my thoughts, my personal opinion, and but I have not been contacted by the mayor of Chicago. And I'll tell you what I told them, which is, the governor and the mayor. I mean, they've created a sanctuary state and city, which is in violation of our U.S. laws, which I think is wrong. And now they want to shove people that they're taking in violation of our laws onto the suburbs, of Chicago. And I think that's wrong. And if it happens, one, we'll do everything we can to comply with U.S. law. Number one. Number two, we'll do everything we can. We'll do everything in our power to keep our residents safe. That's our first and foremost goal, right? But number three, another thing that's not often talked about in all this is these people are still people, and they're being treated like they're chattel. They're being shuffled around by these people like they're chattel. I mean, that's just inhumane. So we're going to treat them humanely too. So if that happens, we'll deal with it. We don't have the resources to deal with the kind of issues that come with bringing in something like that. We're not, we're the 20th biggest city in Illinois. We're not, we don't have 2.5 million people, right? We don't have billions of dollars of budget, so we don't have the money to deal with, or the infrastructure to deal with that. That's actually, largely the county and the state, and obviously they're dropping the ball on that. So, but I haven't been contacted. No one's tried to do anything, and the reality is we don't have any. We have 2 hotels, one and a second one opening, and that's it. So I don't see that as an option. And the other thing that we have is we have laws that prevent those hotels from having long-term stays longer than 30 days. So that also, all of those things are would deter that from happening. And I think they're also trying to shovel money to towns to take them. And I think it's short-sighted because it's not nearly the money they need, but some towns will do that. So, and we won't be one of them.
Okay, we as people living in Orland Park, is there anything that we can do to prevent them from coming in?
Well, what you can do, it's like everything else, just keep voting. And unfortunately, our vote's been split up quite a bit. We have 5 state reps and 4 senators, and they split us up so our vote doesn't matter. I mean, Justin Slaughter represents 50% of Orland Park. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Justin Slaughter does not represent you. Justin Slaughter is the one that wanted the Safety Act. I don't think that represents, he was the driver behind the Safety Act. I don't think that represents the people of Orland Park. But yet, you know, he's in a safe seat. They basically carved enough of Orland out to make Orland's vote not count. Everything else is voting his way. So that's just the way it is. And he used to have 1 square block of Orland Park. Now he's got half of Orland Park because they don't want our vote to matter and to have an influence. And that's I heard it when I went down to the state house. I heard it from what I would consider to be moderate Democrats. They're like, we need more, they said this, they said, we need more Republicans down here so we can actually get some good stuff done. I'm like, well, that's not something that we can control because you're the ones that basically mapped it so that you have a supermajority. And so because they have a supermajority, the minority voice does not get heard. And that's what's happening. And that's bad government, regardless of whether it's here or if it's Oklahoma. If you squeeze out all of the minority opinion, you know, Oklahoma's reversed from us, right? If you squeeze out all of the alternative voices, you don't get to the best result. So, and that's what's been happening in Illinois for pretty much my lifetime. You know, at least certainly the second half of my life. So.
Can the governor supersede federal law?
Technically, no. Technically, no. It's up to the federal government to weigh in on that. And obviously, we have a federal government right now. We have a president who's also violating federal law, right? So, and that's the whole politics of all of it, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, I think one of the key things for our federal government is to control our borders. That's true of every country. And we needed to overhaul our immigration policy for a long time. And frankly, neither side have come to the table to do that. And I think there's places where there's agreements that could be made, and they haven't been made. And unfortunately, that's a federal issue. But one thing that's for sure is that if they're here illegally, then it shouldn't be up to the taxpayers to fund that. And we've always, as a country, we've always taken refugees, and we've always done that humanely, but that can't be the only way that you bring in immigration, because you can't afford to just take in people to basically put them on, make them dependent on you. We need to bring people in that bring skills and things that we need in the country. But that's a much bigger issue than Orland Park can solve.
Right. Another question for you. Is Wild Fork ever going to move in?
They're supposed to. These developments, as I said earlier, like the doctors groups, they've been working on those 2 Robert Morris buildings for 3 years. I was like, okay, I mean, for me, when I was a business guy and I built a new building, it's like I want to get this building up and running as fast as I can and get things into it. But yes, they're supposed to come.
Any plans for the old Denny's?
There are people looking at it. There are people looking at it that think they can reuse the building. I'm not so sure that's possible. And then there's people that are looking at it and potentially tear it down and put something up there. I think we had 3 in the last 2 weeks that are serious. They've got other sites in Orland Park as well. So we'll see. The problem with that Denny's site is it's a small site. You think it's a big site, but it's not, because the rules have changed from when Denny's was built. Same thing with the mall. For water storage and stormwater, you need to store that volume on your own property now, and these properties aren't big enough for that. In fact, we have a problem at the mall, is that basically they're full. I mean, there's no other place. So the ring road has a problem because they can't. those small lots, they have no place to store. So one of the things that we've actually talked with the current owners of Sears, which I'm not optimistic that they're actually going to do anything, and the mall, like us, has an interest in getting that Sears site redone. The people who bought it in auction don't seem to be so interested because they had no idea what they bought. And they get there and like, they own Regent Road. They own that road that goes to Regent in the mall. They own the ring road. That's what people don't understand, is that those 4 anchors own about 20% of the parking lot each. And so anything that gets done has to get approved by all 4. And so it's not the mall owners that handle those Sears parking lot, it's the Sears site that's part of that. So, but as part of what what we've said is, hey, we need to basically take a part of that parking lot and make it into a storage, like a pond, to store some water for the future. And we would help with incentives with that because it helps the rest of the development around there, right? So those are the kinds of things we're doing to try to work with them to get them to develop. Because obviously nothing in Sears means no income, no revenue, and it means very reduced property taxes with a vacant site. So we'd rather get something in there, but we don't want to just take anything either. The current owners wanted to do what they did in Maryville, which is they took all the Carson's, basically all the Carson's furniture, rearranged it and created all these little small shops inside. I'm like, well, that's not going to work here. Number one, none of that exists in the Sears location. Number two, the previous owners that were going to do the AMC, they started to demo it. So they started to take things out and tear things down. See, none of that exists here. So, and they had no idea of that. They just bought it. They literally put a dollar amount in without ever looking at the site.
Is the culture center still going to close up?
Yes, Cultural Center will stop as of December. The assessment we did for the buildings is it was 6.2. It's not a very highly used building. It's not used much at all. It was $6.2 million to get it up to speed. There were a lot of prior to me getting here, a lot of buildings, roads, parks that were just neglected. We were fixing one park every 2 years. We've got 66 of them, so do the math on that. 132 years to fix your parks. Obviously, parks don't last that long. Our roads, 40% of them were in poor condition. Our buildings were the same. And part of that was neglect of not putting money in capital and diverting it to the Triangle. Part of it was just the fact that everything was built around 1990, and so now is the time that things start to need to get redone. They were built in that kind of 10-year window, plus or minus 5 years of 1990. So now is when everything, and there was no money saved up to do that. So one of the things that, in fact, I talked about it yesterday with our village manager and one of our trustees. One of the things that I think that's been the best thing that we've done in the village in the last 6 years, and what's changed, is everything we do is very fact-based and fact-driven. So we evaluated every building, and we said, okay, what's needed over the next 10 years to fix these buildings? And then started looking at what's the usage of those buildings, and because we don't need every one of them, right? And so it gets very expensive to maintain all those other buildings because you got to go clean them, you have to continue to maintain them, and that building in particular, it was $6.2 million. We offered it to the schools to buy it for $1 because they were looking to add a bunch of space, and they're adding to 5 buildings for far more than $6 million. Mostly because they needed early childhood education. So we offered that building to them. They declined, don't know why, and we even offered to keep the parking lot and the maintenance of the parking lot and all of that, and they declined. And so instead they're adding to 5 schools, and they're spending way more than the $6.2 million. But from our perspective, the $6.2 million was better spent because it's a building that's not very well used. It's also it's a little bit more suited for classroom stuff than it is for the stuff that we do, right? With the Parks and Recs programs and things like that, it's not really designed very well for that. So we're taking the few programs that are there and we're moving those over to the Labey Center and the Civic Center, and basically making that area, which is the Labey Center, the Civic Center, John Humphrey, the Recreation Admin Building, kind of making that a recreation campus. So that's where a lot of the programs will be. Obviously, you'll still have programs at Sportsplex and things like that, but that's what we're going to do with that. And we've already got a plan for doing that. So that ends in December. Next year, we'll tear that down. the following year or the year after, we're going to redevelop Dugan Park. Do we have the Dugan Park? Do we have the Dugan Park? Do we have the Dugan Park one? Okay, so the Dugan Park. So we're going to redevelop Dugan Park, which is where that Civic Center sits. And what we're going to do is we're going to make the baseball field smaller. It's been determined that based on our usage, when I was growing up, that was one of 2 Pony League fields, that full-size baseball fields that you could use. Today, we have a lot more full-size fields, and we don't use that at all for bigger kids. So it's all used for kids that have 60-foot bases and under, or 70-foot bases and under. So we're going to just shrink the size of the field a little bit, create a soccer field in the back, which it could be done now because football was played there. That's where I practiced and played football, was back there. So we're going to do that, but the more important thing is, if you think of where the tennis courts are behind the parking lot, that's going to become, the tennis courts are going to stay, but we're going to add 10 pickleball courts, and we're going to light that area. So pickleball's become taken off in the last 6 years. Pickleball players don't like just lining a tennis court because, so tennis, it's 40 inches on the outside of the net, it's 36 inches in the center of the net. Pickleball is 36 inches on the outside of the net and 34 inches. So someone needs to come up with a way to lower the nets and get that and get the net height right. But regardless, this will be basically 10 pickleball courts. So this isn't the site, but if you're thinking of Dugan Park and there's train tracks back here, basically right behind the parking lot, there's going to be 10 lighted courts there. And the other nice thing is you hear about noise with pickleball. There's no houses nearby. The closest houses are over 100 yards this way. You got to go over a berm on the other side to get to houses, so it'll be quieter. And then we're going to expand the parking lot. So it'll actually allow for pickleball tournaments and things like that. So, and that went through 2 public meetings. The Recreational Advisory Board as well. They took a lot of input from the public and actually made changes to the plans based on that. And then then they approved. They made those changes. They approved that. They sent it to us. No one there was opposed to what they came up with, and so we approved what was there. So, and that's new too. Before I was here, the Recreation Advisory Board basically, our rec department went there and gave them a download of here's what's going on. And we got no input from them. One of the things we've put in place for all of our parks is we reach out to the local, basically to the local area, and we survey what they want in their parks for all their park redevelopment. Then we have the Rec Advisory Board has a meeting on it where people can come talk. It's a public meeting, give their input, and the Rec Advisory Board does make changes. It's 9 people. They're people that live in Orland Park. A lot of them, they all either have kids or had kids in these programs, so they understand what we want in our parks, and so they listen to what's said, and oftentimes there's changes. Then it comes to us, so there's a public meeting at the Committee of the Whole, then a public meeting at the Board of the Trustees. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to voice their thoughts. It doesn't mean that everything you say is going to get done, because we still have to look at the big picture, but we do make changes based on the input that people give. So that's a completely new process that we did not have when I was here. And since 2019, when we got 3 new board members, we were able to change that process to get more public feedback on these parks. So much like we do with our planning commission to some degree, although the planning commission is required by state law, we try to do the same thing. So.
143rd Street project west of LaGrange, is that still
So 143rd Street project west of LaGrange was the #1 project for the village before I was mayor. It was the #1 project for the Southwest Conference of Mayors before I was mayor. It's continued to be the #1 project for the village and for the Southwest Conference of Mayors. Why is that important? We get our a lot of transportation dollars from the state that get funneled through the local councils of government, and they help direct that money. So our Southwest Conference, basically it's like Blue Island down to us. So Paylesses are in that. We get a large amount of that money because there's a sharing component, and you have to pay the sharing. A lot of those towns can't pay the sharing, can't do the engineering. So we get a large amount of that. It has been the number one project for the entire Southwest Conference. Back when I first became mayor, there's a point system, and the conference could at that point give all their points to one project. We were getting every point the Southwest Conference could give to our project, and we still weren't getting it. But that tells you how much the rest of the towns around us realize how important 143rd is. If you think about it, Will County has a project already funded to widen it from Bell to 355, or to State. And then so from 355 to Will Cook, it'll be widened to 5 lanes. From Southwest Highway to 57, it's widened all the way, 5 lanes. The only place it's not is the busiest part of the whole thing, which is between Southwest Highway and Will Cook. Makes absolutely zero sense. We were able to get $7 million of funding from the federal government. You may have seen in January, I thanked Marie Newman. Marie Newman and I don't get along much, but on that issue, she worked with us and she helped get that done. And so, I think it was appropriate for us to thank her for doing that work. So we had $7 million there's basically 3 parts to it. There's Southwest Highway to West Avenue. That's about $14 or $15 million. There's Wolf Road to Will Cook. That's 12 or 13 million. Believe it or not, it's relatively simple. That also fixes the flooding problem there and puts.
I was gonna say it gets really flooded over there.
Yeah,
I've been living out here 20 years, and it's always an issue.
Yeah, so it fixes the flooding. It also puts the light at Creek Crossing. Then the big part of the project, the $50 million part of it, is from Wolf to West Avenue. And the reason it's that expensive is because of the soils in there. It's all peat. It's all, if you think when you drive through it, there's wetlands on either side, so it's very wet. And so that they need a lot of land bridges and piers and anchors and things driven into the ground. So long and short of it, we have money from the state, or from the federal government. We've gotten nothing from the state. They continue to not. We found, and it's a state road, by the way. We've also offered the Will Cook to Wolf portion is a non-numbered state road, but it's a state route. We've offered jurisdictional transfer, taking it over after they do it, which is what we did with 143rd from LaGrange to Harlem. Okay, so we're responsible for maintaining that in the future, right? So we offered that. So we're trying everything we can to get them on board to do this. Ultimately, the $7 million from the federal government will go away if it's not done. So we've already committed as a board that if the state doesn't put the money up, we're at least going to get the Southwest Highway to West Avenue portion fixed, which fixes the intersection at Southwest Highway to 1 light instead of that goofy two light, multiple entrance. It fixes that issue. So it probably requires a couple $1 million from us to do that, but we'll do that if we need to. So. But that project is still our number 1 project. We still push it all the time. In fact, we've quit putting the whole idea of widening Wolf Road from 143rd to 169th or 167th is a pipe dream. I mean, we can't get the money for Wolf. So we've stopped putting money towards that and engineering. Said we'll just, when that comes up later, we'll deal with it. Right now, we got to focus on 143rd.
So you think it'd be about a $90 million project from the
It's about 75 to 80. Yeah. So 50, like 14 and 12 or 13, so. And by the time it's done, it's probably gonna be 90 or 100. The IDOT is fixing Southwest Highway, though. They have let that project from 131st to 135th. So that, although we've already kind of fixed the flooding problem that was there, if you recall how much that flooded in the springs. What I learned when I got here, we held a meeting. We called IDOT there. We opened it up to the public, the business owners. IDOT got to take a beating, and IDOT said, "Well, the problem is McGinnis Slough is overflowing," and they said that the county wouldn't lower the level of the slough, and they refused to do that. And I'm like, well, let me see if that's true. So I happen to know, because of my previous business, I know that Cook County was my biggest forest preserves, were my biggest client. So I called him, he goes, that's not true. He goes, we want to lower it for the health of the slough, but they don't want to lower it because they kept saying it was causing flooding. So basically, it was carrying 2 extra feet in the slough in the spring that could have absorbed water. So we managed to work through that in over a 4-month period and get them to start draining the slough about this time of year, and would do it slowly to make sure it didn't cause flooding on Southwest Highway, and then we've seen a much reduced problem over there. Then our engineers, there was a problem with 2 collapsed culverts. Our engineers designed a fix for that, which IDOT was able to implement in about 2 weeks, and since that time we haven't had any flooding. So, but there has been a project to fix that permanently, and they fast-tracked it. When I got here, they fast-tracked that. It was supposed to be done in 2022. They fast-tracked it in 2017, so that it was going to be done in 2020. They just let it in 2023. So the fast track, it was supposed to be done in 2022, and they fast-tracked and it's done a year late. So that's how IDOT works. So it's unfortunate. It's just what we deal with. So. And by the way, they're not back in the office yet. They're still working remotely, part of the weeks. IDOT, yeah.
Well, they don't get
Right.
traffic.
So, yeah.
COVID question. Love the policies we've had in the past. Seems to be ramping up again. Are we gonna maintain our policies?
Yeah, there's no reason to not maintain our policies. I haven't seen any facts that would suggest differently. In fact, since those policies, and obviously I took a lot of grief over it from some, got applause from others, whatever. I was trying to do the best I could with the facts we had. As it turns out, our interpretation of the facts were right, because all the studies have come out afterwards, said lockdowns didn't work, masks didn't work. So we've seen all that since. It's, to me, it's a common sense issue, and I'll go back to where I was at the time. I was watching the data, and when I knew for a fact that so up until that time, I guess the first few months I felt people just didn't know how to react to it, right? They're just trying to figure it out, and some people are just ultra afraid to make a decision. Other people, so I understood it. I had a different interpretation of what the information I was seeing was. But then when we got to October of that year, when they did the second restaurant lockdown, if you recall that, right before they did that, so up until that time, Cook County was reporting a stat, and this was the one thing I was really looking at. They were reporting hospitalizations due to COVID. Now, if you go back to the beginning, the CDC said, hey, this was when there was only 60 cases. They told us all, it's going to be a pandemic, we can't stop it, okay? They said, we can't affect the mortality because we have no treatments. They said, so there's 2 things they're worried about. One was not overwhelming the hospital system, so making sure that the hospital system didn't get overwhelmed so that people can get treated for other things, and balancing that with not destroying the economy. Now, I would contend they forgot about not destroying the economy, and they went all to the third one, right? So, those were the 2 things they were trying to balance. Well, to me, if you're trying to balance that, the thing you should be looking at is how many people are being hospitalized due to this. Well, it was about 12 a day throughout Cook County throughout the summer. And then all of a sudden they locked down restaurants again. Well, they stopped reporting hospitalizations by COVID. They started reporting hospitalizations COVID-like. So that included flu, pneumonia, and everything else. Well, flu, I can tell you, every year puts our hospitals on bypass. I think Northwestern up north, 35% of the year it's on bypass because of the flu, right? So this is not new that the flu would cause that, but they weren't reporting it. They were reporting flu now as COVID-like. And I'm like, when they did that, I'm like, this is not about anymore. It's not about public safety. It's more about controlling what's happening. My other thing with restaurants, and I asked this question, and they didn't get an answer. I said, if restaurants are the cause, so they were hanging their hat on the fact that they did a survey of what people do during the week. And people go to restaurants more than they visit other places. Well, yeah, they probably go to restaurants more than they go to the grocery store. They go to the grocery store once a week, but they stop at Starbucks, McDonald's, probably at least a few times a week. It's just our lifestyle, right? That doesn't mean that's a cause. And I asked the question, are restaurant workers getting this at a higher rate than workers in other businesses? And the answer to that question, by the way, is no. Well, if the answer is no, it's not getting spread by restaurants, right? Because restaurant workers would be getting it more if it was the case. So anyways, so long and short of it, that's kind of how I was looking at it at the time. I was looking at the data a lot, and all the time. And I was talking to epidemiologists at Payless, and also infectious disease specialists at Payless and in Indiana. And they could have conversations with me privately that they could never say publicly because they'd lose their insurance, they'd lose all of that. So there's a lot of information and they're like, well, what doctors are saying this? I can't say that, what doctors are saying that, because I put their careers at risk. They're speaking to me, giving me their honest opinion, knowing that I'm not going to share it everywhere because I wanted that information and data. So we weren't operating in the blind, I guess is the point. We were really dealing with, as much of a fact base as we could. And, like I said, as it turns out, we interpreted it right. I would have never guessed that we would have been right with everything, but as it turns out, we pretty much were. That's just, so when this happens again, I think we're going to have the same reaction. I think you're going to see a lot more people have the reaction we had.
Thanks for the common sense approach.
Yeah, and I will also tell you the other thing that I looked at is I looked at the Constitution. I mean, we could have said shut down businesses. Like, for me to take that emergency action, I'm basically taking away someone's livelihood, their life, everything they've worked for. In my opinion, pardon my French, I had to be damn sure that what I was doing, I was 100% sure of what I was doing. I'll tell you, if restaurants were the cause and it was definitive, I would have said, hey, restaurants need to shut down, right? But they weren't. And I'm like, I don't think you can take away someone's life and their livelihood. And look at all the family-owned restaurants we have around here that would have died. And they tell me all the time, they would have died if they were shut down a second time. Their businesses would have closed and their entire family's work would be gone. And for me, I felt like that's a power you should use only as a last resort and only if you're 100% certain.
And in the meantime, their landlords wanted their monthly rent payment.
Oh, correct. And the state wanted their taxes, and the county wanted their taxes, and you know how it goes. So that was really my thinking. And I know a lot of people, maybe probably some people in this room disagree with that, but that was why I was, that's why we made the decisions we made. And we also point out on this, it's important, is that we went to the board. I didn't make those decisions myself. We went to the board and we had public debate about those decisions, and then we voted on it as a board because that's the way we're supposed to do it. And the board votes were anywhere from 7-0 to 4-3 as we went along. So.
I have a totally different question.
Good, because I'm so done with COVID.
Take it off the subject. 159th and 94th Avenue, that gas station is such an eyesore. It's really dumpy over there.
Yeah, there's
If
really.
they're doing
It was dumping while it was still open, too.
It's so bad. I mean,
The problem with that site is that it's, one, it's a gas station, so it's got EPA contamination, and two, it's very small. And so, obviously when we see things there, when we drive by and we cite them if there's trash and stuff like that. But unfortunately, there's just nothing we can do about it. It's a privately held business. We can't force them to develop. And
even just to clean up the lot, I mean, the grass is weedy and long. Just because it's a main street to Orland Park.
And we cite them, and then we have to go through the courts, and it's not something you can get done immediately, so we do all of that. So.
See, just on ordinance violations, just about the most the village could do is impose fines. But sometimes, because I prosecute for Willowbrook too, sometimes I suggest that the department go directly to the Chancery Division, because the Chancery Division
And we do.
has
Well, so we try fining, and then we try going to the Cook County courts. But anyone who's been through the Cook County courts knows that could take longer than the season to get it done. And eventually we do get relief, but it takes a long time. It takes a long time. We have a house at Beacon and 144th Place, for those of you who are familiar with this house, that has been under construction for 20-some years. And he's not completing the permits that he had, and then he was applying for more permits, which we're denying, and we're fining and doing all this stuff. And, and it's just, it's been going on for like 2 or 3 decades. And it's an eyesore in the whole, and he just does a little bit of work and then the county says, oh, well, he's advancing the work. It's like, yeah, well, he put up one board, so it's, we can't just unilaterally go in and do stuff. We have to follow the law. Oh, I see former trustee Schuschler is here, and he's also on our planning commission now. So he knows all about what I'm talking about.
I do.
And he probably knows about that particular house.
I do.
So it goes back a long way.
I think at one of your other meetings, you said there was a firm going around to all the village ponds and seeing what's needed or.
Yeah, so we evaluated so like I said, we've really moved to fact-based approach. So we evaluated our buildings, like I said, we evaluated our roads. We evaluated our parks, we're evaluating them a second time. Actually, we've evaluated our roads twice since I've been here. But we evaluated all of the ponds, the 300 and some ponds, and the ponds that the village doesn't own but are inside the village. And we gave them a rating from 1 to 5, 1 being top-notch, 5 being really bad, and probably where we'd like to keep things is make sure they stay in that 2 to 3 range at least. There were about 25 ponds that were a 5, and so we're focusing on them first, and then we're moving to the ones that are 4 and trying to get them all up to speed. So, again, like buildings, like roads, we can't fix them all at once for a couple reasons. One is we don't have the money to fix them all at once. But 2, if we fixed them all at once, then a board 20 years from now with the roads would be stuck with all the roads failing at the same time. So what you really want to do to catch up is and what we did is we doubled the spending on the roads because it's catching us up, but not at such a pace that it's going to bind the board 20 years from now where everything's going to be failing all at once. Because what we'd like to do is get to a steady state where over a 20-year period we're fixing the same amount of roads every year. But it's going to take some time to catch up to that point.
Well, because I live on a pond over between Orland Brook, Kemper, Carnoustie, and Marion.
Okay?
And they've worked on the they redid the south shoreline, I don't know, 4 or 5 years
Which
ago.
is really nice, I have to say.
Yeah.
They did a good job.
But when they were planning that, going to the meetings, I said, why don't you do it like the condos on Orland Brook? They got the riprap.
Yeah, I'll tell you why they don't do it like the condos, because the condos doesn't really stop it from eroding, and the other thing is it's not healthy for the pond. The riprap, that's concrete, so what you get is concrete and limestone going to the pond, which creates more algae. So the reason why we restore that with natives and everything is because we're trying to restore it to a more ecologically balanced approach that doesn't require as much maintenance in the long term. Doesn't get all the algae issues, doesn't get all that. Gets better water quality, because water quality is an issue. When things go out of that pond, it goes into the storm sewer, it has to be treated and everything else. So water quality becomes an issue. So that's why.
Yeah, it just doesn't, we've been there 22 years. They've worked on the shoreline 5 times, and they've never had to work on the shoreline where the riprap was.
Yeah. So
and we don't have an algae problem.
Yeah. So so everything we're trying to restore to the status so it doesn't have to be done all the time. I don't know what was done in the past. I can speak to what we're doing now, and what we're doing now is returning them all to a native shoreline. So. And the other thing is you get closely mown grasses, then the fertilizer runs into the ponds and all that kind of stuff. And so the other thing with the natives around the pond is you habitat for wildlife, all of that kind of stuff that you see. So a really good example of the ponds and where they're a heck of a lot healthier are the ponds on Ravinia by the rec building and by the village hall. All natives all around it. We haven't had to work on the shorelines because that basically keeps that erosion from happening.
With animals, I love animals, dogs, but everybody has 2 or 3 dogs now. How can that be enforced where we're not going all over our laws? Here we're spending maybe $150, $200 a month, to take care of your place. Is that being enforced where to keep the dogs off the lawn?
Well, okay, so
Instead of we do have a dog park, don't we?
Yeah, we have a dog park, so if you tried to put all the dogs all the dogs in Orland Park in the dog park, they'd be stacked up on top of one another 10 high at least. I mean, it's a small area. So, I mean, it's up to people to be responsible, one, and clean up where their dogs go, and to keep their dogs, off of people's lawns is a responsibility. But, the reality is that our police department, we have 11 officers typically. I don't think we want them running around doing dog patrol. I think we want them doing crime patrol. So it's really a neighborly thing, and obviously your property, from the sidewalk in, people shouldn't trespass on it. You can certainly call a complaint if you see it, but we don't. And I'm certainly not going to put our police on monitoring dogs. Obviously, if we see them go to the bathroom and they don't pick it up, then they get cited for that because that's, against the law. But this is really about people being more responsible, more considerate, and more respectful of their neighbors. Ed?
Is there any program to deal with the owners of the commercial ponds that have not done maintenance? Two of them I can think of right off the bat, 179th and Wolf and 159th and Wolf. Shopping centers, both privately owned ponds. Neither one has been touched for 20 years.
Yeah, so we cite them. So part of the pond evaluation was that, and we've cited them and say you need to bring it up and you need to have a plan for bringing it up. But as we talked about probably before you were here, is the whole process of which we have to go through to try and get them to comply. So, but yes, there is a plan for that, and I know you have a direct line to the building department, so you could ask them where they're at in the process on both those. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that we've cited a number of them. Some we've gotten more aggressive with enforcement than others because the problems are more than aesthetic. The problems are water flow issues, which cause flooding. So we've had some of those issues, and I can tell you there's one in particular which still blows my mind that we own it, but we actually are responsible for a pond that's a mile outside of Orland Park in Palos. And that's an unincorporated part of Palos, and we're responsible for that pond and maintaining that pond, and all of the homeowners have built sheds and everything else that block all the water flow along all of the whole back area. So we've basically we're in court with all of them to move their stuff so that the pond operates the way it's supposed to. But yes, it's like 124th and 104th Avenue, and we own it. So it blows me away, to be honest.
So I'm planning on getting an electric car soon. And I've noticed a lot of the car chargers in Orland are at the car dealers. Are there any plans to add some either public chargers or, I guess, incentivize businesses to put in chargers? We have
public chargers at the parking garage. The Crossings has a lot of chargers. We're not going to incentivize chargers. I think that's something for the people to do for their customers if they want to do it. And also the mall has a ton of chargers. So I think
those are accessible to the general public?
Yeah.
The ones on the south side of the mall?
Yeah. And same thing with the Crossings. That's why they put it in. So it's up to the various landowners if they want to do that for their customers. They can do that for their customers. And the Crossings has a bunch, as does the mall. Both of those malls have a pretty large amount of electric chargers.
Is there any plans for Silver Lakes Golf Course that there was at one time?
They took it off the market, so they're operating it as a golf course. By the way, when I first arrived, my first meeting, first night, first executive session, they were going to buy it. The board was going to buy it for $23 million. By the way, and I said, "Are you out of your mind?" And I asked, "Have you done any due diligence?" They had done none, which was the same way we got the Orland Health and Fitness. We just swapped it and we never did any due diligence. You can make an argument whether it was the right thing to do or not, but what you can't make an argument about is you should have known that it was going to cost $13 million to bring it up to speed, before you took it. And so they had done no due diligence. So I managed to get enough votes to demand to get due diligence. So I got to 4 votes to get due diligence. And I won't give you all the details of how I had to go about doing that, but basically I threatened to go to the press. And they did the due diligence, and the due diligence said, this is not a good idea. There's a lot of capital, no surprise. But they had this whole big plan. We're going to develop it. We're going to bring in apartments. We're going to bring in houses. We're going to bring in. I'm like, are you out of your mind? How well is the triangle gone? 11 acres didn't go so well, and you're going to get 300? And oh, by the way, when Silver Lake went out to market and auction, or not to market, to get bids on it, they got bids of $10 million to buy it. We're going to buy it for 23. So the last thing we needed was a golf course. So
I heard that Silver Lake had a problem with water, and that's why they couldn't go ahead.
no, they just decided that it was better for them to keep it financially than to sell it.
How about Ravinia, is that what it's called? The
Yeah.
tennis place off on 43rd?
Riviera.
Riviera, yeah.
So Riviera was bought by somebody. They've filled the banquet hall, is filled with a new banquet hall. You've got Opa, the restaurant's gone in there. They've been working on their on the fitness center and the pool, but they haven't found someone to operate the fitness center and the pool. So I don't know what they're going to do long term. But again, they're a private owner, so they can decide as long as it's within our zoning laws. I mean, personally, what I thought that whoever bought that would do, what makes sense in that area, I don't think what's there makes sense in that area anymore. I think what probably makes sense is townhomes or something like that, because it fits with the condos behind it.
Will that outside pool be open?
I don't know.
Or they don't know what that is?
I know that the Opal wants it open, and they have an agreement with the people that are leasing from it to get it fixed, but they haven't gotten it fixed to meet the standards needed to open it. So. And from my perspective, I'm not sure that opening the pool solves, makes the restaurant any different. They seem to think it will. I don't know that it will, but
It'd be nice because, our pool is way on the south side where we need something on the north side.
well, we're not going. So our pool costs us about $1.5 million of loss a year to operate. We're not building another pool. I mean, be real clear about that.
I'm curious to know there's a lot of land north of the grassland walking area that's for sale. The grassland, abuts LaGrange, and then there's a lot of land for sale. South of it, I think it was called
South of it or north of it?
both, actually.
Yeah.
What is your future thoughts, or what do you foresee for those lands?
Just depends on what people, when they buy it, what they decide they want to do, and does it fit within our zoning laws and our plans. I haven't heard of anybody looking to buy those or any projects in those areas.
Is there economic development plan for the industrial parks like the one she's talking about between 104th and 108th, 163rd? There's a lot of vacant lots in there. That's a present industrial park. There's one over south of 183rd that has vacant lots. What's the economic development plan to get those vacant lots filled up with light industrial and the I-80 corridor?
Well, some of those vacant lots in those areas are county that we don't own. Some of them are village. The ones that are in the county, we've been having a problem with the county trying to approve. Basically, they rezoned a site that's R1. They rezoned it to Industrial 2 because this person was in violation of even what he was grandfathered in. We're talking about Einoder over there. What he's grandfathered in at, he was still in violation of all that, and materials, everything else. So we went to the county and said, you need to fix this. Their fix to this was basically let him do whatever he wants. And so now they have hundreds and hundreds of trucks parked on there, and we can't do anything about it. Mokina's fought it, we fought it, Homer's fought it, and we're not getting any help from Will County on that front. Regarding that, we get industrial requests, and that's where we steer them to. When they're looking for industrial sites and they're looking for industrial buildings. We've had we just had one of those buildings. I think, Ed, you could probably tell me there's Back there, they've, added about 140,000 square feet of space back there, which I think roughly, and they've, most of that is filled. So we see more of that. Over there off of 104th, the two big properties that are there are ours, and that's where the police firing range is going. So other than that, we don't see a lot of interest in that site as much as we do in the Will County site. Not surprisingly, they don't want Cook County taxes, but obviously whenever we get industrial requests, we steer them towards those areas because those are the areas that we have that fit that need. So,
Is it county or village that's responsible for the shoulder of the road on the south side of 151st across from the Forest Preserve?
south side of the road across from the Forest Preserve on 151st.
Some of the homeowners will cut their things and other, there's
Well, so the homeowners
a lot
are
and a half.
so the homeowners are responsible for it. Over by the Forest Preserve, that's going to be the Forest Preserve responsibility. But I think where you're talking about, I think if I picture correctly, that's Cook County. That's beyond our limits.
Yeah, it's just the south side shoulder of 151st, but it's across from the,
Yeah, across from the.
Side of their fence.
yeah,
Is it,
Yeah, that's still their responsibility.
kind of like the parkway in front of your house.
Yes,
For
correct. The
90.
parkway is your responsibility to maintain. Where it's not your responsibility to maintain is where it's the county roads and that kind of thing.
Speaking of 151st, do we know when that water project is going to be completed?
Water project is going to be done, well, right now they're redoing the, I think it's 151st to Wheeler, that area in there, kind of between 80th Avenue and Harlem. That's getting, I just saw that, I think we're getting the final courses of asphalt to restore that. But that project, Spur 2, is starting next year. I think it's going to be done, our portion should be done by 2025. I believe we're hoping next year, it'll be done next year, but I'm knowing how these things work, I'm figuring 2025, and then we'll redo Wheeler as part of that. We'll get done. So, but we have to take, it's coming from Oak Lawn, it's coming across, and we have a spur that's going from where you see that going through the Forest Preserve, and that spur is coming down Wheeler essentially to our main pump station. Because we wouldn't have the water redundancy if we don't connect to that. Everyone else has redundancy, but not us. So we have to pay for that piece that goes in there, and that's supposed to happen next year. So, and then there's still like another couple years of that project going further south.
On the 151st, for the farm stand there,
Yep.
should there be some kind of a sign going east that keep to the left to make the turn to get into the farm stand instead of being on the,
Well, so we have traffic laws and traffic rules that we all pass a test for those traffic rules and traffic tests. So a sign to say you should stay left to turn left is probably not something we need to put in there. If they're not doing that and they're taking an illegal turn and we see it, we'll obviously cite them. So you have I'm trying to remember, but I believe you have a middle turn island in the middle. And
one on 151st.
yeah,
Oh, okay, so
Bowley's Farm.
Orland owns that now, right?
Yeah, we own Bowley Farm. I don't recall if it's 4 lanes or 5. If it's 4, then you take your left turn from your left lane. If you're taking a left turn from the right lane, that would be a traffic violation, and if we see it, we're going to cite you. And if you create an accident, you're going to get cited as well.
While we're on traffic, also pet peeve of mine. In subdivisions,
You have a lot of pet peeves.
I do.
You have no idea.
Yeah.
As long as you're not one.
On people's garbage day, they need to why can't they keep the bins in their driveway or on the parkway? Why do they have to put them in the street?
I can't speak to your.
Because if there's a car parked across the street, it's almost like a
I
car
can't speak to your neighbors. I put mine at the end of my driveway, not in the street, because they grab them from the side, so they're driving down the street. So I don't understand. I would maybe knock on the door and ask your neighbor to just leave it in the driveway.
Because in the winter, when it's dark in the morning, there's no reflective things on these bins, and
It's not a problem in my neighborhood or the neighborhoods I drive through. I've never seen that as a problem. So you must have some neighbors that have an issue, but they grab it from the side of their truck. So I would maybe just talk to your neighbor and say, they grabbed this from the side of the truck. And, if you put this in your driveway, they'll just grab it there, and then it won't block traffic.
I can see if you got a house full, you got 4 cars. Okay, but you don't need to put them in your driveway. Put them on the parkway.
Well, in any case, you're going to be in the parkway. They're not going to be. They're not going to be because that driveway apron is still part of the parkway, so it should be in the parkway. But unfortunately, I can't control 60,000 people being in.
Snowplow driver, can you take them out?
Well, the snowplow driver will go around them, and if we see that, they'll let our police know, and our police will go give them a warning and let them know to move them in. So,
I have a question about, since you brought up the snowplow drivers. I had kind of a run-in with one last year. I think it was last year. Because I was blowing the snow and it was going in the street, but it's not that I intended it to go in the street. That's the way the wind was blowing.
Right.
This guy came out and kind of like
Shoot
me out.
Well, so if that happens, when it happens, you should call the village, and because that shouldn't happen. A driver should not be impolite to you. He can ask you, he can be polite, but he shouldn't chew you out. If that happens, you got to tell us at the time, because we know who was in the truck, what truck was there. We can pull all of that down.
I just wanted to know where I stood on that, because I was actually
Well,
doing my neighbor
you
who
should
was
try
there.
not to do it, but let's be honest. First off, I plowed snow my company plowed snow for 16 years for the village. I probably plowed for 6 or 7 of those years till I finally said, okay, enough. All my guys can do it. I'm not getting in, unless there was an emergency and I needed to fill in for somebody. Okay, so I've plowed the cul-de-sacs, so I know what plowing the cul-de-sacs is like, and I've dealt with the issues. I've had a driver threatened with a bat. Okay, somebody getting in front of them and threatening them with a bat. Okay, at the end of the day, as homeowners, we're not supposed to dump snow into the street, but it's almost impossible not to dump some snow into the street if you're snow blowing the street. I know in mine, what I do is I circle into the street and then try and blow it back to the sides and then clean out the sides. That's what I try and do. And I think our drivers, by and large, know that, and unless somebody's being really egregious, we deal with it.
Because I always try to play the wind, so then.
Don't we all?
Like if it's blowing, if I'm blowing.
That's what I'm going to be doing in about 3 hours, playing the wind.
This way, I'm going to be covered in snow. So
Yeah,
it was just.
but a driver should not be.
It was inappropriate.
A driver shouldn't be confrontational like that. If they are, you just need to call the village and we'll address the issue. So.
The problem is some people are, not you, as you said with the wind, they're ignorant.
Well, some people are inconsiderate.
They go down the end of the driveway and they blow it straight into the middle of the street.
Right, and there's some of that, and that is, again, it's back to being considerate, and again, we try, but.
I don't know if it's an ignorant as an attitude or true meaning of ignorant where they just don't know they're not.
Well, there's a combination of both.
Well, if I blow it in the street, seriously.
But at the end of the day, the issue there that you brought up was a driver, and they shouldn't do that. If that happens, you should call the village, and we address those issues. That's why we have these systems, and this goes for everything. It goes for potholes. It goes for the ponds that you see. Call the village. We have 22 square miles. I had someone. This is a good example. I had someone send me a message on Messenger about bike paths and limbs hanging over, and we need to clear those bike paths. Like, we have literally hundreds of miles of bike paths. Some of are ours, some are the states, some are the counties. I need a lot more information than you need to clean these up, because I need to know where the issue is. right? Because we have an entire village. We have to fix potholes, fix curbs, fix these things. We don't have the manpower to drive every bike path every week to see if something's overgrown, to drive every street every week. So what it gets down to is we have 60,000 residents. If you see a pothole, we have a website. We also have a mobile app. You can make a phone call and say, hey, there's a pothole here, and we'll put it on the list, and we will address it. But we just can't see everything that's out there. Nothing like having 60,000 people out there, not with 70 public works people, 11 people on shift at the police department at any given time. We don't have enough bodies out there to see everything that's going on. So we, to be realistic, we try to be as proactive as possible, but oftentimes we're complaint driven. If we hear about, we're not driving every neighborhood to 22,000 homes to see if their grass is 9 inches tall, it needs to be cut. But if someone calls us and say, hey, this place is 9 inches or 10 inches tall, our code enforcement goes out there, and usually, in fact, we just had one of those. They talked to the person and they said they literally fixed it right. They started fixing it right there, right? So usually that's what happens. So, and a lot of times, to your point, it's just not knowing. I can tell.
The village does put in a lot of their written booklets and stuff that this is what you're not supposed to do.
Right.
I mean.
So, and sometimes it's education, and we have we'll have this issue sometimes with people move here from other countries, right? And they buy a house. In those other countries, they don't necessarily have lawns or take care of lawns or do any of that, and they just flat out don't know, right? And so our code enforcement says, hey, look at everybody else. Look at everybody else's lawns. This is kind of how you need to maintain it, right? You need to pick up, and sometimes that, it's just an educational process. But we can't check 22,000 homes. We can't check 100 miles of bike path and 22 square miles of roads. We can't check them every day. So anything that you tell us about, we do address. And believe me, just the stuff you tell us about and that we know about, that we address, keeps our crews busy.
I have to tell you though, when we have called the village, we did call on the snowplow driver, I remember now. But I just want to tell you that everyone has always treated us with respect and gave us the answers we wanted and directed us where we wanted to go. So, the staff is great. I think they're great.
Great. And what I tell people too is, our staff are people. And when people call and scream at them or yell at them, and the people do, let's face it, if you're screamed and yelled at, you're a lot less likely to be helpful to that person than somebody who's nice to you, right? So they're human beings. So, no one on our staff doesn't want to help you. They all want to help you. But there are times that we deal with this a lot with the county and state issues and roads, right? There are things that we can't do. If we drop plows on LaGrange Road, the next thing you know, the state will be suing us for the repairs on LaGrange Road that have nothing to do with the fact that we plowed a section that they didn't plow, right? So we do everything we can to help where we can.
They were great.
Sunset Ridge Drive, off 151st, it's continued being speedway.
Yep.
Can't we do something maybe on one of the corners, put a stop sign where we can stop some of that traffic?
So we have on Sunset Ridge. It's interesting that you say that because we just had a traffic report done there, and so the 85th percentile of 85% of drivers are at 29 miles an hour and below. That's 1 mile an hour higher than what I typically see. Our speed limits are 20. I will tell you that they're set artificially low. They're set artificially low because we want to keep people driving at a lower speed. So we don't typically ticket unless people are driving 11 miles an hour over. So we would consider under 30 on those streets to be reasonable. 85% are at 29 and below. The high was 43 miles an hour, which actually isn't that high. Usually we'll see something higher than that in a traffic study. There is a large volume of traffic, probably more than most, because that goes from 151st to Wheeler. So there's a large volume of traffic there. But we have stop signs on Sunset Ridge already in places. There's also curves, which also calm traffic and slow traffic. I just had this discussion with the chief yesterday or the day before because I just saw this traffic report. There's very little we can do from a stop sign related issue. because it's not going to stop. All the places where you've had accidents there are where there's stop signs, pretty much. So in the last 3 years. So the stop signs aren't going to stop the problem. We actually have just discussed it. We're gonna amp up our for a while. We're gonna amp up our speed. Our traffic unit is going to spend more time there. I will tell you, the people that are going to be ticketed are all your neighbors. It's not people from outside of your neighborhood. It's people in your neighborhood that are driving that speed. But so having seen the traffic study, literally, it was Thursday that I got the traffic study. It's as far as the average traffic speed, it's pretty normal for all of our areas. As far as the percentile that are speeding above 28 miles an hour, it's about the same. It's a little higher, 1 mile an hour higher. But it does have, relative to most places we do a traffic study, it has more volume of traffic, and that's because Sunset Ridge goes from 151st all the way to Wheeler. And so that's why that is.
So if they're going 40 miles an hour, that's fast, isn't it?
Yeah, 40 miles an hour is fast. Like I said, the highest speed over a 10-day period recorded with our camera out there that recorded all that was 43 miles an hour. That was the highest speed of the entire time. 43 was the highest out of, I think it was 3,500 cars. That was the highest. That is actually fairly low. I think Ed would tell you this. When he sees traffic studies, there's usually in every... we had a traffic study that had a tenth of that traffic, and the high speed was 55 because someone flies through that area. So you're as far as massive speed, it's much lower than you typically see. You just have a lot more traffic than most. And we'd be happy too to give you we do this, we give people speed guns so they can shoot the speeds and see what they are, because that's the other thing. People think people are going 40 miles an hour and they're really going 25. And that's also true. So, but we're aware that Sunset Ridge, we're aware of Sunset Ridge because we just had a speed study. We just did a speed study there. There's nothing there that is abnormal. We don't have abnormal speed. We don't have, given the way the road is configured, it's not an abnormal volume. It's more volume than most roads in Orland Park because it has a half a mile straight without, where it doesn't, you don't have to turn, right? But it's got curves, which calms traffic. The other thing is Sunset Ridge is a little wider than other roads, which tends to speed traffic up. So we're going to do more speed patrols out there in the coming weeks to see how that helps. And it'll help temporarily, but then it'll go back probably because people slow down when they see police and they speed up when they don't.
100 West is that street?
What's
Where is you said
Sunset Ridge is probably what, 8,400-ish.
82.
Part of it's 8,400 west, but the rest of it I think is a little bit east of it, I think.
It's about 84. It's about 84 because 8,200 is down there. There's the light there.
Who do we contact in an instance? I live on a corner where there's a three-way stop, and it's kind of a nuisance, but there's a lot of little kids in the area. We got one dude in particular that flies, 40, 45, and doesn't even lift off the accelerator. You can hear him coming and right through. That's a daily occurrence. So who do we call?
So you can make a complaint to the police, and the beat officer in that beat will pay some attention there. I can tell you that when he sees the car there, he's going to slow down, right? It's going to be hard for us to catch him. But also we can, when we hear about that, we may also run an unmarked in there once in a while to see if we can find it.
It'll be easy to catch the guy.
Yeah.
On the straightaway.
Well, you say it's easy. You say it's easy, but it's not like he's going through there every 15 minutes. So, in a 24-hour period, how many times are our cars going to be there at the same time his car? So it's not as easy as you think because there's 11 of us.
If we get a video,
well,
do anything with that?
We're not going to be able to do anything with that because your video's not going to say how fast he's going.
Right.
So now, if you have the video when there's an accident, then of course that will be helpful. But you can call the police. You can, just say that this is happening a lot and non-emergency number, and they'll put it on their list and they'll just pay attention and look and see if that's happening. And again, it's someone that lives in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, we can't control the consideration of others.
Right.
It's just like the garbage bins.
Yeah.
Not to bring up a bad subject, but these robocalls, I'm sure you know who the guy is. Has he ever confronted you like face to face or at a meeting like this where it's involved?
So first off, he denies that he's doing them, but we know that he's doing them. He's done over 100 of them. I talked about it at the State of the Village. We know who's behind them. We know who's doing them. We know who he's involved with, who's behind them. That's all in the State of the Village. The guy has also filed 50 lawsuits against us. We have to deal with all the time. The Cook County courts do nothing about it. So
Like I said, does he ever, come to a meeting like this, face to face or be
no.
or be a chicken and just do it on the phone?
No, but if he came here, he hides in his mother's basement, but he's also a convicted felon for threatening a federal judge. So if he comes here, I'd be honest with you, I'd be concerned for all of us. These guys would be on the horn. There'd be police officers here if he ever came here. That's just, I'm not saying the police officers would do anything, but they'd be watching very closely because the guy has a history. I mean, he's a convicted felon for threatening a federal judge. So this is not, but again, we're doing everything we can in court. No one wants them to stop more than me because they're all about me. So they're all attacking me and my family. So no one would like them to stop more than me.
I have a question regarding the solvable problem,
Okay?
but it involves intergovernmental cooperation.
Well, then it may not be solvable. Okay?
Well,
But
you have a little more clout than in
Oxymoron.
The county recently repaved 167 between 104th and Wolf Road.
yep.
And it crosses the railroad tracks down there between 108th and Wolf. The railroad track there, the Metro line. So they could have solved the problem when they did the road, but they stopped about 15 feet from the tracks on either side. And the road is higher there, and the problem still exists. So you come up to the railroad tracks and you go up, down for the tracks, and then up again on the other side.
Yep.
And you can't do the speed limit through there.
So as you know, they repaved the road. They didn't rebuild the road. So fixing that problem requires rebuilding the road, right? At least a section. At least a section of the road. And I think the other issue is it's not just Cook County, it's Metra. And Metra is, you think Cook County's bad, you know this, you think Cook County's bad to deal with. Metra's a whole new animal to deal with. So that's the issue there.
Put it on the list
So, hey, Nabia, Bonnie, can you put that on the list and just get it to Joel? Well, you should be listening. So 167th, the railroad crossing by 108th, the grade changes. Can you let Joel know and just put it on the list with Metra and Cook County to see if they can resolve it?
I'll give it.
It's a county speed bump.
Right.
It's a jarring speed bump.
I know.
Quit speeding through there, Ed.
Yeah.
Who is in charge of the gutters on 159th Street? Is it the state or is it the village? Because there's an issue by Orland Brook, and it is the gutter.
The gutter on 159th Street. So 159th Street, that's going to be a state road.
Okay, so it would be the state for the gutters and the curbs.
Correct, but you can call the village and we'll let them know if they're. But what do you mean? They're clogged?
No, the 159th Street is here. When you turn onto Orland Brook, and I brought this up last time, but I wasn't sure who was in charge of this. You go way down before you go up onto Orland Brook again, and it's.
Well, that's not a gutter. That's a road.
Not the street, it is the curb and the gutter in front of the curb.
So 159th and Orland Brook doesn't have a curb going across it. It's an open road.
It's an extension of the gutter. Okay, so if you're, on this side of Orland Brook or that side of Orland Brook, yeah, it has a curb, but then when there's a street, there's no curb, but that's the extension.
Okay, so I'll have to drive by and look at it, but at the end of the day, Orland Brook has a road and it goes into 159th.
Correct.
That's what it has.
Correct,
So
but it does this.
if it has, if what you're talking about has a concrete for water flow,
Yes.
that's that's not going to change. That was engineered for 159th to make sure water flows and doesn't puddle there.
Well, it seems it's more excessive than in other places in the village.
Well, I mean, I guess we can't. Everything's not perfect. We can't make every road exactly the same. And what the important thing is, they have to make sure that water flows. And again, you're turning from Orland Brook to 159th, so you shouldn't be going very fast for that to cause any issues. And it has to meet state transportation and IDOT transportation. It has to meet all of those codes and all of those regulations for that.
It might not meet those.
Right. No, I understand. So, but that was recently repaved, so, and redone. So, usually they fix those types of things.
Back to ponds.
Okay.
No, you said they're evaluated on 1 to 5.
Yeah, that was the rating system, was 1 to 5.
Is Mike Massa still in charge of ponds or in the pond department?
Well, so Public Works is responsible for ponds.
So if I called them, could they tell me what
They-
my
they-
pond is? 1 to
Well,
5?
they could tell you what your pond is. They could tell you where it ranked relative to all the other ponds. They could tell you all of that.
But they can't tell me what the name of the pond is.
Well, some of them are by location. They don't necessarily all have names. So we don't name all of our ponds. We have 300 in some of them.
Yeah, I know.
So it's so it's probably named based off of the street or the so they know the location of it. So if you let them know where it's at, they can look at that and they can tell you.
And I know in a previous meeting you said there was money budgeted for stocking.
Yep.
Has that been done? Do you know?
Stocking was done last year. You don't stock every year, so it's like $11,000. So it's whatever the recurring time frame is for stocking. It's in our budget it's not taken out of our budget. So it's a small amount, and so all of the ponds were evaluated for which ones can have fish that that will ecologically can handle fish, and that doesn't mean they won't have them if they're not on that list, but it means that they're actually deep enough and they have the water flow and everything else that the fish can stay healthy. Those ponds are being stocked. And if you go to the Parks and Recreation Guide, it'll tell you all of the ponds for fishing. All of those ponds are stocked. So.
Because like I've told you before, I'm trying to get my pond stocked. But I'm on the whole chain of ponds.
Yeah, but if your pond's not in that recreation guide for ponds, we don't stock retention ponds. We stock our the ones that are associated with our parks. So we're not going necessarily and stocking those other ponds. We're focusing more on the park ponds.
Because it used to be a great fishery,
Yeah.
and now it's not.
Well, I mean, the one by the Parks and Recreation building used to be great when it first for bluegill and bullhead when I was a kid, but I don't know if it is anymore, and people don't really fish it anymore. So
We used to catch, 12 and 13-inch crappies, 250 in a 2-week period.
yeah, well, all that overfishing is what got rid of the fish. I get it now.
I'm all catch and release.
Yeah.
I wouldn't eat a fish unless I was starving out of a retention pond.
Yeah. So yeah, but all the ponds that are listed as in the guide as places for fishing because we wouldn't want to stock a pond. Think about this from just this goes back to your dog poop issue and your bin issue and all this other. Do we want to invite a whole bunch of people to come to a pond that's not part of a park and start fishing there? And parking on your street and doing all we wouldn't want to do that because we don't have the infrastructure is not built to handle that. And now they're walking through they're walking through your yards. They're doing all that kind of stuff. So we try to keep the ponds to the pond stocking to where we have parks, which are designated recreation areas.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, on Marion though.
He doesn't.
At the bend there's a public greenland space. People hang out on the benches. And I think it's good to have every pond that's sustainable to have fish in it. maybe,
Every
take
pond,
a-
every
take a
pond that is,
fishing
every
instead of
pond,
hanging out at the mall.
every pond that is sustainable for fishing, that is at a park location in the village is stocked. So, and there's a bunch of them. I don't know how many, but there's a couple dozen if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I have a list.
Of our
ponds
66
that
parks.
Have been stocked in the past.
Yeah.
That
So,
I got from Gary Couch when he was still.
yeah,
here.
and you could ask Public Works and they can tell you exactly which ponds are stocked now, because we evaluated them all. Oh, you're welcome.
Cooper Hawk, on the side street there, the winery there.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the cars be parked in one of the parking lots over there on the south side instead of being on the street?
So there's nothing preventing them from parking on the street, just like any other neighborhood street. They can park on the street. If we felt there was a safety concern or there was an accident concern, which there hasn't been, if there was, we could potentially make one side no parking, but we haven't seen that issue. So, and Cooper's Hawk Valet parks across the street, not on the street.
Right. Is that old restaurant still, is it privately owned? The one that closed where?
The Ginger Bistro used to be
Yeah.
an Asian place.
You mean the one across from Cooper's Hawk?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, Cooper's Hawk is leasing that property for parking. They've come to us with some development plans, but they've never really continued forth with it. By the way, the development plans they came for was a massive apartment complex, so I didn't think you wanted that. So we said no. We didn't think a massive apartment complex in a business district made a whole lot of sense, so we told them no. So it doesn't fit our zoning, so they couldn't do it. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Very good.
What other questions? All the questions were about potholes, garbage, ponds. Any other questions about development? Go.
Actually, sort of development, 151st in Harlem, there's that car wash, and I think there was like a hot dog.
There's Don's Hot Dogs that burned down. Don's, yeah, Junior's, then Don's, yeah.
Are there any plans for development there?
So the problem that Don's has is that it burned down. And back to what I said before about MWRD rules changing and having to store water on your site. The site is so small they can't store their water because they have to now follow the new development codes. And so there's a problem there for them. And so they're trying to figure that out.
Underground.
Well, that's what they have to do. They have to store underground, which is very expensive, and a hot dog place can't afford it. So that's the issue that they have there. So yes, they would like to rebuild, but the problem that they're running across is not our problem, it's an MWRD problem.
If worse comes to worse, and we get all the immigrants, where are you going to put them?
Okay, so back to what I said before, we've had no calls, no anything to put immigrants here, and we don't have any place to put them. So, so no one's made that call. No one's, and they're offering money to a lot of towns to take them in. The money won't even come close to covering the cost, but they're trying to get towns to take them. So we're not going to be one of those towns. So.
Just give Texas Governor Abbott a phone call, tell him not to send the buses.
Well, Texas has their own problems. I mean, the amount of people coming across the borders there, they can't handle it either.
I know.
Do any of the suburbs around here have like a host program?
A host program.
Almost like a, like, I won't say like foreign exchange students, right? You have
So
come here.
I know that when the Ukrainian refugees, there were some Ukrainian refugees from the war, I know that some of the communities, people hosted families, so people, but I think those are more done through local charities and that kind of stuff as opposed to government programs.
Yeah, our church is,
Yeah.
is Calvary over on 104th Avenue. They're hosting 2 Ukrainian families.
It's more administrative. administrative than
The sessions tend to be problem sessions about this, that, and the other thing. I think the village board, you and the trustees have done a good job with regard to long-range plans for ponds, parks, and village streets. So, kudos.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think you guys are doing a great job.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, you got here late. You didn't hear me talk about all the stuff that we've done. But yes, and to me, the most important thing we've done is we've done that based on a fact base that we've built. By evaluating all the roads, by evaluating all the parks, by evaluating all the ponds, by evaluating all the buildings. It's not just planning for how we're going to do it, it's knowing what we have to do. And having those facts really help us have a plan. And, so I'm not so sure, I'm pretty sure we weren't doing a lot of that before. We did test roads before, but the other stuff we weren't evaluating probably as much as we needed to.
When I was on the village board, we started the road testing program.
Yep. Yeah, that had started before me.
Several different boards, a couple of different times, and we really didn't do enough long-range planning. We really stepped up and filled the void there.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I will say, though, that you probably did more, well, we didn't do enough, in my opinion, either. We did a lot more than most towns do, because I can tell you, we got towns near us that they are really regretting the fact that in 100 years they've never done any planning whatsoever, and at least there's been some forethought into the village. For example, putting our commercial corridor down LaGrange Road was very smart, what we did. If you think about all the commercial that we have, and this probably predates either of us, Ed, but back in the 60s and 70s, what they did when the mall came in and those planning, if you go to Naperville or Schaumburg and you try and get around there, it doesn't matter where you go, there's massive traffic. Whereas here, if you live here, you know how to avoid 159th and LaGrange for your day-to-day operation. You go there when you need to go there, but you don't have to deal with traffic everywhere you go to live your daily life. And that was very well done, I think, by the village.
And 94,
and 159th being your main corridor down that, I think that was very smart, and we really didn't,
a few things right.
So we've done some stuff, and I think we did a good job. I think we did a pretty good job of building parks and building infrastructure. We didn't do a good job of long-range planning for how we're going to repair those things and keep them up. That was where we maybe fell down a little bit.
Can I ask you a question about the mall? Being that malls in general are kind of fading or going out, are we have any projection of, I don't even know how much control you have over the mall. I mean, I don't shop there unless I have to.
We don't have control over the mall. It's privately held, but I can tell you, we talked to Simon. That was probably a very big failure of my predecessor. He had no relationship with Simon, and that pretty much happened like 6 or 7 years before I became mayor, because he went down there with our development person and said they want to tear the mall down and build townhomes. And Simon went, "Are you out of your mind?" And they had a whole plan drawn and everything, so they spent a lot of our taxpayer dollars to draw this plan. I don't even think the board knew about this visit down there. And so from that point on, the mall stopped talking to the village. Well, it's 10% of our tax base directly and probably 40 to 50% of our tax base indirectly. That's asinine. The first thing I did when I became mayor was reach out to the mall. And, oh, by the way, if you recall, February of 2018, we lost Sears, Carson's Home Goods, Babies R Us, and Toys R Us in the same month, 8-month in. Welcome to being mayor, right? But I'd already had conversations with the mall, so I knew that Carson's was likely going to go. I knew that Sears was likely going to go. And so we'd already had preliminary discussions with Von Mauer about the Carson's, which is why we got Von Mauer so quickly, right? So we already had, because we had engaged them, and the whole Von Mauer thing was largely because of the relationship with Simon that we developed. I don't know if people know this. Simon Properties bought that Carson's property for $15 million and sold it to Von Mauer for $1. So they use that as an enticement to get Von Maur. And now, obviously, we did an incentive program as well. And I can tell you, it was the most refreshing thing ever of all the negotiations I've ever been in, is that I had talked to Bob Larson, the CFO, over the phone a couple times. And I went to Las Vegas to the retail conference there, and he was going to be there. And we decided to meet at a Starbucks over there by the conference. We met at a Starbucks for 15 minutes. And I basically point blank asked him, I said, what do you need to make this deal happen? And he said, $7 million. And I said, I think I can get you to 5. Let me see how I can bridge the gap. Then we got him to, I think we got to 6 or 6.5. We had his team come down here. We sat through a meeting for 2 hours, hammered out the details, and it was done. How refreshing to not have, if we're dealing with Cook County, we'd still be having the negotiations 5 years later. And so they were in there a year later. And so, so the mall itself, back to your original question, it's a top 1% traffic mall in the country. You're right, malls are dying, but not all malls are going to die. Okay? Some malls are going to die.
It's one of the safest malls in the country. The stats, they've got studies
Yep.
that prove that.
Yep. So Simon Properties, which is the biggest mall owner in the world and in the U.S., who owns that mall, they believe so there's 24 regional malls. There might be less now, but there were 24 regional malls in the Chicagoland area. They believe that's going to shrink to 10, but this is going to be one of those 10 without question, which is why they've invested in it. Why they've, you've seen some work on the roads, you've seen some of that. What happens as these other malls die is the malls that survive will be stronger. And you're seeing that. Our sales have continued to increase even though losing Sears. We still see sales tax go up. Why? Because you think about it, River Oaks closed. Where do those people come to shop? They come to Orland Park to shop. They come to Orland Park to eat. Well, Lincoln Mall's closed, so where do those people come to shop and where do they come to eat? Joliet, same thing's happening. So that all helps our mall. So our mall is going to be there for a long time. I'm not concerned about that.
In Sears, they have next to no vacancies over there.
There's no vacancies over there. Any vacancies are just because they're changing over. Sears is the only vacancy. I'm in conversation. I just had a conversation 2 weeks ago with Simon about Sears, and the problem is Simon doesn't own it. They should have bid $500,000 more than they did, and then they'd have control of it, which would be better for them and for us. But the mall's healthy. Our retail sales are healthy, so they're still increasing. So the sector that's actually down right now is auto sales because they had such a big spike during COVID. So now they're down a little, but they're still up over 3 years ago. So they're doing fine. So overall, we're doing fine on all that. And to Ed's point about the mall safety, so we have we've subscribed to a service that tracks malls throughout the country and crime. And if you've been to the State of the Village, you've seen me talk about this. So I think our rating's 55 on a scale of 0 to 100 is the average mall in the country. Ours is 55. So we're half as much crime within a 3-mile area, and I think we're at 65 or 70. We're at 70 for 6-mile radius around the mall. So we're still 30% less than the average mall in the country, and it's the safest mall in Chicagoland.
Yeah, I just, my thought is the reports you hear about retail in general, people are shopping online, I'm concerned that, we have this huge space as the mall, but
well,
you're saying it's helpful.
It concerns us, right? Retail, so online shopping's increased. There's going to be an equilibrium at some point where, you're always going to have brick and mortar. How much is e-commerce going to eat into that? I actually think COVID probably ramped that up to where it's at the equilibrium it's going to be at now. I think it jumped a lot during COVID, but I think now it's kind of at an equilibrium. You're seeing that, in box manufacturing and all that, it's actually declining back down again. So I think you're close to that equilibrium, and a lot of e-commerce companies are opening brick and mortar. What that means, though, is that the spaces are getting smaller because they're not holding as much inventory on their spaces. So what concerns us, what concerns me as a mayor, are our big spaces. How do we fill our big spaces? We were very fortunate to get Steinhoffels to take 2 big spaces because and Steinmart. And the reason why is because those big spaces, we have all the companies that take big spaces. We already have them here for the most part. So it's really hard to find new companies and new things to take big spaces. So that concerns me if we lose a big space. The other thing that concerns me more, and this is kind of the long-term strategy, for me, it's about keeping our core healthy. So that means LaGrange Road, that means the 159th Auto Corridor, and really it's the Auto Corridor I'm concerned about because I actually think that eventually the Auto Corridor will eat up some of these the smaller strip centers as they expand, but to keep those two areas vibrant. And so what that creates, though, as things move into the core and keep the core healthy, we're going to lose some of those retail strip centers. We're going to lose, it's going to get harder to fill those, right? When we see something new built in the core area, like, for example, the Triangle, which no one's asked about, but that project, it's not going to be a ton of new retail, but it's going to be some. And some of that's going to come from other places inside Orland, right? So then I worry about those other spaces. But to me, it's a lot easier to fill a small retail space in a strip center because I can put an office in there. I can put, we can put a dentist office or something like that can go in there. They're probably not going into the middle of the mall, right? So those are easier to fill. And, another area you think about retail, you mentioned Riviera. You've got a fitness center, you've got a restaurant, you've got a banquet hall. Well, that area, if you think about it, would be relatively easy to see that become housing because you have housing all around there, right? So some of that can happen. You can't do that with the mall, right? You can't do that with Orland Park Place. So really the focus is keeping our corridor of LaGrange Road healthy. And we've been doing a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, it is good. I mean, so have you guys ever thought about, I've been seeing a lot of this, and my own family's interested in some of these non-alcoholic restaurant bars. Have you seen them?
If a restaurant wants to come in and be a non-alcoholic
restaurant, it's more of a, there's a couple of them. There's one in Naperville where it's like a bar, but it's, like just bar food and it's a non-alcoholic.
Yeah, any place that wants to do that can certainly come to us and open up. I mean, it's a free market. Right. So the village, unlike what people think, the village doesn't say, oh, well, we want Von Maur, so it comes.
The mall that would reach out to these people.
Well, yeah, so it would be the mall, it would be the property owners. They really drive who comes to the village. Now, in some cases, we see things like the vacancies at Carson's and Sears, so the village proactively reaches out and says, hey, what can we do to help fix this problem, right? And we work with them to do that. We're going to do that more for bigger spaces. Small spaces, those tend to fluctuate, and we don't get involved really with the mall at all on the interior spaces because what people don't realize is they're dealing with a much bigger puzzle than just Orland Square. Like everyone's, oh, we want Lululemon. Well, my understanding from the mall is they want to come there, but there's only 4 locations inside the mall where they want to be. Well, if there's already leases at those places, and those leases don't allow, some leases allow the mall to move them, some don't, right? And then, of course, Simon tries to cut a deal with Lululemon to get them into 4 malls. Well, you really want to be in this mall? Well, we want you in this mall too, right? So there's a lot of moving parts to what they try and do.
Is it true that, now I don't think the village per se has a lot to do with this either, but I've heard from different people they have had left because of the taxes that they're charged or the rent that they're being charged is so incredibly high.
Well, the rent being charged is because of the taxes, but the village is 6% of the taxes. 84% of the taxes are your schools and your fire district. Believe it or not, your fire district is your 3rd highest taxing body. Look at your tax bill. It's almost as high as District 135, but it's the schools. And it's the way that property taxes are done in Cook County, in businesses in particular. So what happens in every other county in the state is that you get a property value, and your percentage of the property value, so your house, whatever little percentage it is of all of Orland Park, or whatever that taxing body is, that's what you get charged, okay? And the business is the same way. In Cook County, businesses are charged at 2.5 times the rate of a homeowner, which is great for people. I mean, it's good for us as residents, because if you looked at your house compared to a house in Frankfurt, you're probably paying 50% less tax than you would pay on a similar valued home. But businesses are paying a lot more tax. That's what's driving them out. And the rents that they're being charged is because the landlords are being charged that tax, and they have to pass that tax on. The good news about Orland is, even when they're getting that tax, you know, you look at Bonefish is the #1 bonefish in the country. Cooper's Hawk's the #1 Cooper's Hawk in the country. And Cooper's Hawk isn't even in a great location, and it's still got the #1 Cooper's Hawk. The Cooper's Hawk Wine Club, Orland Park's portion of their wine club would be the #3 wine club in the whole country. I'm not kidding. A lot of the businesses, it's their #1 store. Toys R Us went out of business. It was the #1 store in North America, was here, but the whole company went out of business. So Carson's was like their #5 in their whole chain. It wasn't here that was the problem. It was their whole business that was the problem.
Going back to my original question, now that's what's kind of happening with these big companies are going out of business. And
Yeah, and that we can't control. Bed Bath & Beyond, that happened. Bed Bath & Beyond, I think, wants to be back here, but they want a smaller location. So that goes back to, they don't want the same size locations they used to have. You know, so. Well, Binny's wanted a bigger location, so they moved to the new location, and so you got 10,000 feet. But that's a lot easier to fill than these big spaces. But we're always, this idea that, oh, we have vacancies, and it's horrible. We have always had vacancies. We will always have vacancies because businesses are always going out of, it's cyclical. Businesses go out of business. Businesses move locations. It takes time. I mean, it takes, Steinmart's been, I mean, how long has Pete's Fresh Market been working on the Art Van? And they've been working that since Art Van went out because they own, Art Van was renting from Pete's, that location. So they've been working on that for what, 3 years now? And they're not going to open until next year.
Well, I just heard a report that Mariano's is in trouble. So.
Mariano's is in trouble. They merged with Albertsons. Not anymore. Kroger and Albertson just merged. So Kroger and Albertsons just merged, and for antitrust, they have to. They basically have to sell off a lot of their stores. So they're selling off 400 and some of their stores to the wholesale grocers. And the Mariano's name is going away. We don't know what's happening with this one. I mean, I don't think that store is going anywhere. It's going to change, either going to change ownership or change name. But Albertsons and Kroger's merged. It was yesterday, I think, or the day before they finalized it.
When's Pete's Pocket open?
Next year.
Oh, next year.
Next year. That, Steinmart, Silver Cross. So.
You mentioned the triangle. What's the status on that? It's only been going on 20 years.
Yeah, Ed, it's been going on for 20 years. Yeah.
Only ask me why.
Yeah. So the triangle I inherited. Thankfully, I didn't allow the Silver Lake thing because we'd have had 30 times as much land that we've been trying to develop. So triangle history, which you know as well as anybody. So we basically decided to put in a TIF and to redevelop 143rd and LaGrange. Now, I would argue that when it was still fully rented, and yes, it was old, but eventually a developer would have come in with plans. Instead, we decided to try and jumpstart that, use taxpayer money to buy businesses out. As I've learned, businesses that were friends of the mayor got good deals. Businesses that weren't friends got a lot more fight. Then you flash forward about 10 years from when it was done, we still didn't have anything there. Now, what I've learned about how a tax incentive financing district works, the biggest thing is that you want to have a plan right away because you want to build right away, because what happens is the new property tax you get from those new buildings goes into the project, but it's only for a finite period of time. So if you waste half that time before you get anything, you lose all those years of getting dollars. So that's what we did. So then we took apartment buildings. It was the only thing that so we ended up putting apartment buildings. If you go back to the Land Development Code, I think it was 08, it said everything along that road was going to be 1 or 2 stories.
Well, some mistakes were made, but.
So I'm just giving you a history. So we have that.
Recession came along, and that's what caused
Yeah,
the
but we ended up putting apartment buildings in because, and quite frankly, because 10 years we had nothing, so it's like we got to put something here. I think is what a lot of what
Yeah,
that.
there was a recession.
Right. So we end up putting apartment buildings.
They couldn't get financing.
Right. So we end up with apartment buildings. Then we end up with University of Chicago. Now, University of Chicago is great to have here, but they were looking at other locations as well. We gave them a very sweetheart deal, and when I say sweetheart deal, they would be paying on that building about $1.5 million in taxes. They're actually paying us a $750,000 land lease, so they're getting about half of the price of what it would have cost them, what we would typically get for a building like that. Now, they would have been a nonprofit somewhere else as well, but at the end of the day, the bad news of that is it doesn't go into the TIF, right? It doesn't really help us with that, and it's less money than what we'd have gotten with property tax. Plus, in 25 years they own it. But we have these buildings. We have 9 acres left. So what did we try to do? We went out to the marketplace. We asked for bidders, and we wanted them to give us a development for the whole thing, the whole 9 acres that were remaining. We had 2 that submitted for the whole thing. It was Structured Development and Edwards Realty. Structured Development was the one that was chosen by the board on a vote of, I think it was 5-2, so it wasn't unanimous. I voted for Edwards, by the way, at the time, because I thought they had a better plan. Structured Development, COVID came along, they backed out. So we went back to Edwards and said, are you still interested? They were still interested, and so we've been discussing, they looked at market viability for a year, and they have come to us with a plan. The board actually discussed in executive session, we discussed that plan. The next board meeting, I think it'll be public, we'll talk about that plan. But the people of Orland Park have been, I'll say, maybe sold a bit of a bill of goods that there's going to be 500,000 square feet there and it's going to be all this walkable downtown. Well, first off, it's about a block by a block. It can't be that walkable, right? You just can't have that much there. So, but what we have there coming, no more residential, so no additional residential. There's some restaurants, there's some retail. The park's going to get moved. So those things are coming.
When?
So, next board meeting, the term sheet is going to be discussed and approved publicly. And basically, from there, we get a development agreement has to be done, and the TIF has to be done. All those things are happening in parallel. If all goes, and the timeline seems to be following, basically, ground will be broken next year on that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people. At the end of the day, a lot of people will be unhappy with it. It's, again, what the market will dictate. But what was important to us is not to add a bunch more residential. What we told Edwards, and they live here, so they understand this, is that we want something that all of the residents of Orland Park can enjoy, not just the people that live there. So if we're going to help get this done, and we have to, we're going to have to do a new TIF in that area, which is 23 years. But the good news about that is they will start building right away, so that will generate the dollars they need to. And we've staggered it in such a way that we're not putting the money at risk that we put. So we're $31 million in the hole on that TIF right now, and we put $64 million into the apartment buildings. We got some of that back, but we lost money on them. In total, though, the TIF, we're $31 million in the hole. The way it's structured right now is it's going to be tiered over time, so that there's some stages, so that the risks we're taking early on are less, if you will, so that while there's some financial risk, it's not $64 million like it was with the apartments. It's less. So, but there's, I think in total, the development's about $88 or $89 million of development.
Starting next year is what you're projecting.
But starting next year, and in fact, we will definitely, regardless, we will start, because I don't know if you know this, but when this was done, the infrastructure, the storm sewer, the water, the electric was run right through the middle of the properties that we have to develop. Not along the edges, right across the middle. So we have to, the village has to spend several $1 million to move those utilities regardless of whether Edwards does it or not. So we're going to start doing that. That's already been engineered. And, but so some of the stuff in there, there's a daycare, there's some restaurants, there's an entertainment venue. That's probably the most uncertain, but it's also the last phase. And worst case scenario, it stays a park. There's a new park as part of it. That new park would move our ice rink from Centennial over there. And so to keep winter activity in that area, hopefully. And then there's retail and that kind of stuff, and office space as well. And so that's what we're looking at. But next board meeting, I think that's going to be discussed publicly. So all that stuff will be out there.
It's almost 11 o'clock, but what is the term limit for the mayor now?
It's 12 years.
How many?
12 years, 3 terms for the mayor, for the clerk, and for the trustee.
It was for Owens, and that's been some time back.
What's that?
The last time we voted was for Owens. Owens. for
Okay.
mayor. But
Yeah.
many, well, you probably remember that, or your family back years ago.
Yeah. So, McLaughlin was there for 24 years, but it's 3 terms. Technically, myself and 3 trustees could do 4 terms because term limits cannot be retroactive in Illinois. They can only be proactive. So term limits were put in during our first term. So it's the next term. So technically, I'm in my first term of term limits, but the term limit for any newly elected mayor or trustee is 12 years.
We voted.
Well, all I can say is, my wife and I,
Thanks, Ed.
your administration and the
Good job.
board are much more transparent than in the past. I mean,
We try to be.
9750, the original plan, creating a downtown, I thought was a bad idea from the beginning.
So did I. I have emails dating way back.
I mean, 'cause if you don't originally have a downtown, I don't think you can create one.
It's too small to create one, and you're
Right.
absolutely correct.
And
You can't create a downtown, and it's not a big enough area anyways. Maybe you can create a nice little shopping area or what have you. I was against it at the time because I didn't think the village or the government should play developer. And as you see, 20 years later, we're in the position we're at. Now we have 9 acres left. I'm trying to make sure it gets developed. We're doing what we can on it. I've said very clearly, because I know people are going to complain about what they're like, oh, it's not walkable. Okay, well, here's the other option, because this came to us and we didn't have to give them a dime. Fill that whole area with apartments. Anybody want that? I think that's a really bad idea. I said I will leave it green space for the next 50 years before we fill that area with apartments. And, so we have to look at the marketplace. Back to the point that your wife was making about retail shrinking. If we build 300,000 square feet of retail there, guess what? It takes from the mall, it takes from everywhere else. So we have to be really careful about what we do. So I think it needs to be a nice area, but it doesn't have to be the main part of Orland. It will never be the main part of Orland Park. It is not big enough to be the main part of Orland Park.
do you know what the current occupancy of 9750 is?
I think it's maxed. I think all of our apartments in town are maxed. People want to rent right now.
Okay.
But if you get too heavy into rentals,
Right.
and then the market shifts and you get low interest rates again, now you got vacancies in rentals, and now they lower rates in rentals, and you see you look at like Calumet City, that's what they did in the 70s. And they built a lot of rentals, and so they built a lot of rentals, and then the market went down and down and down and down, and that's the problem you run into. So we're trying to be very cognizant of that. We were 2018 or whatever, the highest percent of owner-occupied homes for towns with more than 20,000 units in the country. And Tinley, I think, was number 9. So I think we want to keep that, and where it's mostly owner-occupied, but we're trying to balance it because rentals are wanted. So the 171st Street projects are rentals, but a lot of those are ranch, duplexes, and the rental rates are $3,000 or something. I wouldn't do that, but for some people that they only want to be here for a couple more years, they don't want to own. A lot of younger people saw the crash, so they're worried about buying homes, right? So.
If you're a veteran, like I am, Korean Day, aren't we supposed to get some type of a discount on a real estate tax?
So if you're a veteran, you get, if you're a disabled veteran, you can
Not
get,
disabled.
if you're a disabled veteran, I'm just telling you what veterans get. Disabled veterans can get basically not pay property tax. Veterans themselves don't get a break on property taxes. As a senior, you get a break, you get a senior exemption, but veterans, there's no veteran exemption unless you're a disabled veteran. If you're more than 70% disabled, I believe is the number.
There's also senior freeze.
And there's a senior free, if your current, yeah, if your current salary is a certain thing. But, and I'm a veteran, and I'm not a big fan of, you know, a lot of veterans that are listed as 100% disabled are still working and making a living and everything else and not paying property tax. I don't think that's right, and I'm a vet. Because there's a lot of people getting 100% disability or 70 or 80% disability that are still fully functional and still working. Which, you know, so because what happens with those property taxes is that what they don't pay gets spread amongst the rest of us to pay. That's what happens. So I'll give you a perfect example. Senator Hastings from the South, you know, he served 4 years, you know, great on his service and his time in West Point. He's considered 100% disabled. He works as a state senator and as an attorney, and he pays no property tax. And you know, I don't think he's going to the poor farm anytime soon. So those are the kinds of things, you know, for someone who's truly disabled that can't work, who's a veteran, absolutely. But for those people who are still in the workforce, you know, I'm not a fan of that. And I'm a veteran, and I want to support vets as much as possible. But I just think that's a bad idea for those that are perfectly healthy and can still earn a living.
Speaking of veterans, I encourage everybody to look at the video that was on the, I think it was the village meeting that was posted. I think it was a personal attack on you and the board, which should have never happened. But, you know, you were open to answer a question about veterans building and stuff. And
so what he's referring to is 2 board meetings ago, I was attacked on the board was attacked. But also, there's also a video out there where I explained everything that's happening at the Veterans Center. And that's what he's talking about. The attack was false. It was absolutely not true. In fact, she said she had a video of it, and I said, show us the video, please. And you know, that video is not surfaced because it doesn't exist, okay? At the end of the day, I'm a vet. I'm also a member of both the groups that use the Veterans Center. I can tell you the Veterans Center is old. Okay, it's old. It has, back to our evaluation of buildings, $398,000 of repairs over the next 10 years that it needs. And basically, it's beyond its useful life. We can move them to another location, which is about 4 blocks away. We're going to take care of all the move and everything else. It's about $100,000 to gut the building and give them additional storage. But we actually have the picture of that here, which is basically this will be the main area of the new area. It's about 100 square feet bigger than the current meeting area. So it's actually a bigger meeting space. The storage is 3 times what they currently have, and the parking outside is like triple what they currently have. And then there's also a deck, and it has a full kitchen, which they don't have currently. So from a member of both posts, I think it's much better. It's a place where you can actually have picnics, you can do stuff which you can't do at the current site. So, and from a financial perspective, this building has got a useful life of another 20 years. That other building is pretty much beyond its useful life. So it was kind of a no-brainer decision.
Can they imply that all the veterans are ticked off at you?
And they're not. There are two that are in a position of, and one of those 2 have said they never knew about it. That's just not true. In 2018, they were told. And they were also given the opportunity to buy the building, the current building, for $1 if they so choose.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do that because they know that's not, and I don't think it's a good idea either. But they could if they want. At the end of the day, They were told in 2018 that this is likely happening, but I'm going to find a place for them to go and find a home. And we did. And we're the only municipality I know of that provides a place for veterans and for the VFW and Legion. Everywhere else, they own their own buildings. And I think that's the people of Orland Park have been generous. As a member of both posts, the people of Orland Park have been generous and are continuing to be generous to do that. So
is it combined use between VFW and the Legion?
Yep.
Oh,
yeah, and it's basically for all veterans as well. And so I think there's another group that uses it once a month as well. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Great today.
Thanks. Thank you very much for coming out.